I'm going to really quickly introduce our panel and dive into some conversations because I know we're running short on time. So Andrew's had his introduction already, but Professor Donna Houston is the Discipline Chair of Geography and Planning at Macquarie University. Marianna Southwick is the Director of Southwick Advisory. And Andrew Coward, on the end, is a co-founder of Reactivate and the chair of the Sydney District Council of the Urban Land Institute. So please welcome our third panel. I'm going to get stuck in. I want to cover a couple of things that really build on Andy's presentation and take us away from the conversations in the first couple of panels, a discussion around sector and the science, to how do you actually make places attract and grow and nurture those industries. I want to cover the idea of precinct governance. I want to talk about curated versus organic growth, which I think is a challenge in a place like Macquarie Park. And then the elephant in the room often in Macquarie Park is the role of housing. And Andrew, you've talked to that, but there's so many different views around the role of housing, the scale of housing, the importance of housing in Macquarie Park. Andrew, I'm going to come to you first. We know that innovation, co-location, collaboration go hand in hand. We also know that precincts like Macquarie Park and other innovation districts around Sydney rarely have a single landowner, a single tenant. Andrew, you talk to Stockland and Goodmans and the universities, but there are always other smaller players in that, and that makes for a fragmented land ownership and tenant profile. And often those tenants have different visions for what they want singularly or what they want their place to be like. How do innovation districts and precincts more broadly overcome this conflict and ensure that everyone's swimming in the same direction?
Thanks, Jeremy. A really good point. Obviously, excuse me, like Macquarie Park, there are many other districts that are incredibly disparate with numerous different landowners, occupants, businesses, etc., etc. I'll probably make 3 or 4 points and I'll keep it as quick as possible. One is obviously establishing an essentially governing body. Marianna and I worked on another nearby district, the Westmead Health Innovation District, and that was sort of to a degree governed centrally by the Greater Cities Commission. Obviously they are no longer around, so RIP to the GCC, but that really helped some of the initial collaborations between all those different disparate organisations that were in that really incredible district that is generating outstanding patents and research as we speak. And their role, in a sense, brought together all of those disparate stakeholders. They had a strategic activation plan, essentially governed sort of meeting process that occurred every month at a steerco level and at a level that was sort of a level down with all the occupants and businesses and stakeholders to really create that sense of collaboration. To that point as well, I think the 3 most important words, and Andrew H obviously mentioned this before, collaboration, collaboration and collaboration. Can't stress it enough. It's such an important tool to make these precincts work successfully. And then another layer to that is engage, engage, engage. So many of the clients that we work with, public and private, are often hesitant to engage. They're hesitant to engage with local residents. They're hesitant to engage with local business. But when you start having those conversations, you find these amazing gold nuggets, these kind of aha moments that can really help build connection and create collaborative precincts. One example, speaking to Westmead, is when we were working on that project, we found that the Brain and Mind Institute, the CSIRO, they were already collaborating, and we leveraged upon those existing collaboration platforms and created this incredible connection between the district that led to researchers, submitting patents, applying for research projects, etc., etc., etc. And then I suppose the last point I'll make is establishing charters, like Federation Square did in Melbourne, sort of 10 years or so ago, and creating a statutory body with a board that has skin in the game, nous, clout, and almost gusto to get things done. There are probably 3 points I'll make to, in terms of answering your question, Jeremy.
Thanks, Andrew. I think the idea of place governance really comes into there. And Andrew, in your presentation, you talked about as a place, essentially not letting perfect be the enemy of good in getting underway. And I think the same goes for governance. I think in Australia, we've tied ourselves in knots trying to identify the perfect governance model for a precinct, and that's often slowed us down. And so the idea of just recognising that can be a different model for a different point in time, for a different precinct is fine. We just kind of need to get going and get those groups together. I guess on that point, often the idea of innovation districts is a focus on what's the next big innovation for productivity and economic development, and has a link to this idea of, economic growth is the single biggest driver of innovation districts. And maybe that's a narrow view, and I want to explore the wider opportunities of innovation districts as part of economic development agents of change in particularly cities. Marianna, when we talked the other day, you talked about the notion of inclusive growth and how it pertains to innovation districts. Could you explore that and explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, sure, thanks. There's growing concerns and criticisms that a lot of the knowledge economies are actually driving or contributing to gentrification, to economic, social and racial polarisation. Last year I was fortunately working with London School of Economics and the LSE Cities area with the Greater London Authority, and we were looking very closely it was a detailed 3-month research consultancy piece of work around innovation districts and life sciences sectors across the UK and actually globally, but specifically looking at inclusive strategies. And what became clear, we did a whole stack of interviews as well, is that many of them are recognising that they're actually not contributing to their to the local place vulnerabilities and helping their citizens and communities. So King's Cross Knowledge Quarter recognised enormous economic success globally, and yet they're already recognising that in fact they have become somewhat exclusive, they have been gentrified and homogenised, and that's actually impacting innovation. So their new forward strategies are very deliberately, right up in their mission and vision statement, addressing inclusive strategies so that some of those growth benefits are available to all their citizens. We were doing this piece of work for the London Borough of Tower Hamlets. Now they actually own, if you like, Canary Wharf. That enormous juggernaut financial district brought no benefit whatsoever to Tower Hamlets, which is one of the most deprived boroughs in London and has the highest rate of child poverty in the UK. And so it's now moving into a life sciences sector growth. I think it's the biggest life sciences building now that is just had planning approval. And they're looking to very deliberately and proactively incorporate inclusive growth strategies as this new sector comes into play. Now, they've got some of the most diverse populations. The role they could play in clinical trials, etc., is seen as a unique strength. And then equally, another case that we looked at was the Chattanooga Innovation District in Tennessee. Since 2015, they've been leading in digital inclusion to ensure that that there is racial equity. They've invested in subsidised hardware, access to internet, digital training, and a whole range of social entrepreneurship programs, which has really made an enormous it's opened up the pool of talent and people that are able actually to contribute into that ecosystem. So I think inclusive growth is actually really important to tap into so much potential in innovation districts.
Yeah, great. And that's kind of really particularly focusing on the vision and the outcomes that the precinct, the district might be seeking to achieve, the way that they develop their programs and the way they work with communities that are representative in that sort of wider local community. Bringing Donna and Andrew into this part, what does that look like on the ground then? So from a planning perspective in a precinct and a design, what does inclusive growth mean?
Well, from my perspective, I think it's a reminder that we're all placemakers. Everyone in this room is a placemaker, and so are other species and beings on this planet as well. So thinking about placemaking is not something that's done to a community, but should involve communities from the outset, I think is a really important idea. So really it's about the process and the journey, not just the words that we can throw around about what innovation districts should look like. And from my perspective, I'm a professor in the School of Social Sciences here, and there's a lot of innovation and talent across the university. We have academics who are DARA custodians. We have people who work in the sort of social infrastructure and social impact assessment. And so I think that bringing the whole university community into these conversations about what an innovative district could look like is really important. But yeah, the power of public space and the power of the public domain is really important. It's not a nice to have, it's actually fundamental.
It highlights, I think, the value of universities. By their nature, they are so diverse in the activities, the faculties, the breadth of students, domestic, internationally, that come to places like Macquarie University. That notion of inclusivity can be really supercharged if universities are drawing from that really diverse background and clustering, I guess, of activities. And from your perspective, and again, probably teasing out some of the things you've already addressed, inclusive growth and design in the way that you see precincts taking shape in the future, and examples from overseas.
Do you know what's really interesting about almost any innovation precinct you look at around the world, or even any major multi-billion-dollar development for that matter? They almost always occur a bit out of the way, not in good locations, on what was industrial land, because it's cheap and you can get it at scale, and no one cares, so no one's going to complain, and it's generally next to a poor neighbourhood. Now, there's hundreds of these around the world. We've got them in Australia. We don't sort of go to the best place in the city and go, we're going to do one there. We generally go to somewhere where, 20, 30 years ago, people thought, Macquarie Park, that's crap. Let's do it there. No one's going to complain. We can do whatever we want. And we don't care about residents because they're not part of this. They just happen to be not too far away, but they're not our people. We don't need to worry about them. We're firstly building factories, then we're building offices, and none of us are going to live here. God, we'll just turn up and then we'll leave. The evolution of that is actually to think about that the people who have lived around these locations, and I can pick so many places around the world, even Australia, low socioeconomic, low levels of education, low salaries, high levels of unemployment. The university, as well as having an innovation precinct, is the most incredible opportunity to change lives, is actually to spread its wings to these communities and bring them in for training, for education, for mentorship, for involvement and engagement, for job creation. And actually what we should be doing anywhere we go for an innovation precinct is first and foremost looking at the surrounding community and saying, how do we collaborate and engage with the residents who, generally speaking, get ignored? Now, what's interesting about this precinct is that while there's traditionally been a pushback on new residential, we have seen quite a bit of the towers go up on both sides of Macquarie Park from a number of developers at scale. There's still going to be a hell of a lot more to come, but these are new residents. They are not, by way of society, or they're not in the same tribe as the previous residents from decades ago. We kind of need to find a way to bring everyone together. And part of that is thinking about a 7-day-a-week experience in this area. It's about thinking about a nighttime economy. It's about thinking about job creation. And it's thinking about different ways to create access for those previous and newer residents to be participants. Because if it's just an innovation precinct with no residents, it's boring, right? It's a monoculture. And it is, well, I'm being generous by saying Monday to Friday, because we all know right now it's Tuesday to Thursday. So what a poor use of space, of opportunity, of assets, of land and of buildings. We need to be stretching those assets and actually getting more value from them. And the best way to do that is to have a weekend economy and a nighttime economy. And you cannot do that without residents. And you've got to engage them through that process.
I'm going to come back to the residential, commercial, industrial conversation as well, because I think if we started with that, we'd probably spend the whole conversation on it, because it's such an important and challenge that Macquarie Park in particular is grappling with, but innovation districts across Sydney more broadly. Before we do get to that though, I want to explore the idea of the tension between curated growth and organic growth. We had, I think it was Doug on the panel before, talking about, Macquarie Park has so many of the actors required in that sector, from the pathology providers, the research in the universities, the businesses doing the research, potentially scaling for manufacturing. But just because they're here doesn't necessarily mean that they are collaborating and they're curating future innovative ideas. So, Andrew, I'm going to go back to you to start with. I'm going to bundle the two questions together. How important is intentional curation, but how do you also allow for organic incidental creation, which we know creates quite authentic places or elements within places?
Yeah, certainly. It's always a very fine balance between organically growing precincts and highly curated precincts. I might throw to an example in Paris that I've been lucky enough to spend a few weeks working at, Station F, on the south side of the Seine. You could argue it's one of the most successful innovation precincts in the world. However, it is privately owned and operated, but it is highly, highly curated. And you could argue very, very successfully curated. They've intentionally partnered with Microsoft, with Amazon, and AWS, Google and Huawei. And they've created a whole bunch of incredible programs that build the connections in that precinct. It is actually an ex-industrial piece of land, as Andrew H mentioned. It's an old railway station. So you've got that kind of, it's on the edge of town, that sort of part of Paris is not exactly the fanciest part of Paris, but the district kind of bleeds into the community organically. However, what they've also done is take a really strategic approach to actively curating nighttime economy events, activation generally, and F&B experiences. And they've brought experts in who are not necessarily traditional participants in technology districts, and created this really incredible precinct that is highly curated. But what it does is bring in the surrounding residents. It brings in other people from right around Paris to go to this amazing district in this cavernous old railway station, and you really get this outstanding sense of place. But you genuinely see every day people are having a coffee together, talking about what they're working on, what they're funding, what they're doing from an entrepreneurial point of view. Just jumping to sort of the organic side, look, it's tough with organic, but New South Wales is changing. You might know that the round 2 of the vibrancy reforms were just passed by the 24-Hour Economy Commission in Parliament, I think, last Monday. So it's getting easier to activate and program and curate precincts like Mac Part a little bit easier, and hopefully that puts us in good stead for the future.
Yeah, Marianna.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. Organic growth is often where early stage districts and precincts begin, and that's their incredible creative and innovative starting point. But the really important thing about curation and more organised governance models is that it actually helps attract the financing. Placemaking can be quite expensive, and urban governance, interestingly, is it's not just Australia. They're grappling with it all around the world, because cities and precincts and places are increasingly needed to deliver more and more, whether it's decarbonisation or innovation or jobs or inclusive growth. And so we need to explore, and interesting, the topic talks about collaborative governance, but the UN, the new urban agenda, and a lot of the urban specialists are looking more and more to integrated models of urban governance, because we've actually got to get more sophisticated on how we work together, and not just government institutions and private sector, but also actually really bringing into the decision-making table communities and not-for-profits and foundations and things. So I absolutely think there is a wonderful value in organics, but we've got to get a whole lot better at very deliberately curating, integrating our governance, really looking at ways at carefully and innovatively funding a lot of these types of required things.
Donna, just to bring you in, again, from a planning and a social perspective, is there a way of balancing that, sort of creating a place that is clearly curated from a design and an investment attraction perspective, but still allowing literally the spaces for ideas, businesses, activities to flourish and evolve?
Does this work? Yeah. I think absolutely. I think what Marianna is saying is really important, and I think Andrew mentioned the role of charters. So increasingly, we do have to think about how these places are being developed and managed and into the future across lots of different domains. And innovation districts are really interesting because they are these sort of mashups of all these different things. So the challenge there is to sort of think about how can that be sustained? So often there's a lot of energy, good energy at the beginning of something. Everyone's like, we want to do something. But I've been here at Macquarie for 16 years and have seen quite a few iterations of the Macquarie Park Innovation District, and it does tend to run out of steam. So that's the challenge, is keeping the momentum going. And I think the more buy-in that there is from communities and people who are there in the long term, the more successful it will be. Yeah.
And it probably helps having a clear kind of brand and, to your point earlier, Andrew, a clear brand and expected outcomes that the place in its totality is kind of striving towards. I did say I've got a couple of minutes. I wanted to talk housing, and I'll come to you first, Andrew. You talked about the need for housing, so that this is a 24/7, 7-day-a-week place or series of places. The flip side to that argument is often residential can come in and start to price out activities that occur in particularly in industrial areas. And we know that the idea of Macquarie Park being Pill Hill, it's quite unique as an innovation precinct, probably in Australia, where we actually manufacture the things that are innovative, not just the R&D. How do you see that tension reconciling? How have you seen that occur overseas, perhaps, where we've been able to balance residential to get that injection of activity, but still allowing the things that can't compete on a price perspective with residential to be able to stay and flourish?
I mean, the market will do what the market does, and the only thing that will change or restrict or reshape that is zoning, and it's predetermining what goes where. It's interesting, I always look at the city of Sydney versus the city of Melbourne. The city of Sydney traditionally has been dead boring at night time. There's just not enough going on and there's not enough vibrancy. City of Melbourne has always been, buoyant, and there's, it's busy on a Monday night. And it simply comes down to the fact there's 160,000 residents in the city of Melbourne and there's 5,000 in the city of Sydney, in the CBD. The council's always been anti-residential, which has been an enormous mistake, and they're paying for it now. It's imperative that we actually have residents amongst all of that. I'm not suggesting it should be the dominant asset class by any means. And right now, what we've got on both sides of Macquarie Park, along the freeway and then along the other sort of highway, is quite a lot of residential coming to fruition with a number of developers. And I absolutely support that. I think it's going to really enliven and bring this area to life in a way that it's never had before. The challenge is about what you do through the middle. And I like the idea of everything remaining as it is in terms of commercial, light industrial through that central space, except for Macquarie Central Shopping Centre. I think that in itself is an enormous opportunity to enliven and actually create this sort of magnet in the middle of the whole area that becomes a destination for all people with all needs. Because we're always thinking about, we can talk about people, but you can't do everything for everyone. It ends up being boring and lifeless. You've got to be really thinking about the audiences, and not just like workers versus residents versus visitors. You've got to be a lot more nuanced about that. And so when you're thinking about creating experiences, the more nuanced you are, the more compelling it is. And there are some sort of cliches that you might do on weekends that everybody likes because they're just things that are fun for everybody. But you need to be thinking more about the fact that if we are going to have more residents, we're going to have families. So it's not just about people, it's about who are the people, where do they come from, what do they need. The first thing any of us in this room needs to be doing is analysing. What have we got that we don't need more of or we want to amplify? And then what's missing that we should be investing in? And sometimes it's not just about focusing on a feasibility and the rate per square metre. It's about an asset class that can actually lift up those other asset classes and their overarching value. So you will actually invest in something that's not going to give you the same rate of return, but holistically, it's going to have a far greater impact because you're meeting a need that otherwise is not being met.
Thanks, Andrew. I think the idea of like a point of convergence for a place like Macquarie Park is really important. I know I'm going the stairs from Davor to try up. Does anyone have any kind of final points on the housing challenge opportunity for Macquarie Park?
One of my concerns is around the densities of the housing and how much public and green space is being provisioned for incoming residents along with workers. So I do think that there is a real, when there's a kind of an emergency and there's got to get a lot of stuff in pipelines, some of the important things fall away. And so what kind of a place is this going to look like in 5, 10, 20 years is a really important question. So I think that I agree with Andrew. I think residential is important but shouldn't overtake. But sometimes what we see with policy is that it can be one or the other, or kind of competing cross yeah, things, employment and residential get sort of caught in the crosshairs where the outcome for place is not great. So I think that's the thing we need to have our eye on. Yeah.
Can I just also add, Macquarie Park has land, and we need land for advanced manufacturing facilities and plants. So I think housing, absolutely yes. Mixed use is really vital for all districts and precincts, but I think we just really need to make sure that we're not putting homes where we may need to put advanced manufacturing industrial facilities, which are absolutely critical in the ecosystems and is a real strength for Macquarie Park.
Sounds like the need for a strategic plan for a city, perhaps, to understand where these things are going to occur. I'm going to say, thanks, Matt. We are out of time. We've covered a lot of ground in not much time. So please join with me in thanking Andrew, Donna, Marianna, and Andrew. Thanks, everyone.